In your first sermon on relationships, you talked quite a bit about the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and how we see the Trinity from the beginning of the Bible at creation all the way through the Bible. And you talked about how the relationship within the Trinity can be something that helps us aspire toward in our relationships.
Yes.
But the Trinity is a concept that can be really hard for us to wrap our minds around.
Right.
And so I'm wondering if you can elaborate on how you see the relationship of the Trinity being something that we can apply personally.
Yeah, well, that's a good question also. And it was one that's interesting to see when these come up in our own life group the evening after I preached that message. It was one that several people, you could tell in our group, they were, it was on the one hand enlightening to just kind of, okay, I can think about these not just as theological realities that I know to be true about God or that I affirm as part of a Christian creedal confession, a sound faith and biblical idea of God, but also, there's something to God that, to answer your question, as I mentioned, I think this week in the sermon, it's not necessarily easy to figure out all those things. It is somewhat speculative to assess exactly how it is God exists that way. But we know that he does, and I think even just knowing and pondering that a bit helps us understand why we're wired for relationships for sure. And as I said, I think a couple of Sundays that means then that God must have design for the relationships too. The thing that comes to mind most immediately is what we looked at even this Sunday in Ephesians chapter 5, which is this particular reality of the church and living in, which we'll, I think, talk about in a minute, submission to one another, surrender to one another to a degree. And I do think that's one example of a dynamic between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, where we see something that we can't envision because we're broken people. How can you live in that kind of relationship? We can't fulfill it, and we're always relating to somebody else who's fallen. But we see that the Lord is doing that in equal status, but differing capacities or differing roles can fulfill that. That's an example of something where I would say, okay, we can at least ponder what it is that how God is relating, the triune God, and then it plays out into our lives as well.
Yeah. One thing that I thought about was in just during Jesus' lifetime or physical life,
Right, sure.
like incarnation,
Earthly life, yeah.
we see him interacting with the Father and being led by the Spirit, and that's always been helpful to me to see that relationship playing out in a way that, a human way, I guess.
Very true.
He says he's only doing what he sees the Father doing, and so constant communication and whatnot.
Excellent. There has to be some sort of eternal, constant communicating and relating between the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and in love with each other, but with some differing roles and responsibilities that they perform, but with a constant and equal valuing of each other. So, yeah,